Hey guys, welcome back. So I have recorded the boss fights for the new Timeslide. I've run through that now, and so we'll take a look at those and then I'll offer some tips and commentary afterwards. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things. If you haven't updated the game yet or you haven't been on Discord in the past few days, there is an update available, and they did announce that Sound Blaster and Sunstreaker will be coming to the game presumably in a couple weeks after this current Timeslide. The first of those bots will come out. And then otherwise, just in case you didn't see it, we have this Autobot arena going on right now. It's an Autobot event, and we're using these faction chips, which are the same chips that were used, if you recall, in the cinematic gauntlet from a few months ago. So if you didn't spend all those, you might have some, and you can spend them in the current event. It's the same kind of setup they've done for a lot of these events, so you need 20,000 chips to get a 5-star, and grinding the arenas alone is not going to get you there. However, there is also this calendar where you're going to get some of these chips every day, and then presumably they will run an Autobot gauntlet next week. That's not guaranteed, but that seems pretty likely. That could be a really good thing, or it could be kind of disappointing depending on what they do, because if you recall, with the cinematic gauntlet, the rewards are actually pretty low. They were significantly lower than they were for the Decepticon gauntlet that ran last year. So if they were to up the rewards even somewhat, it might be very worthwhile. With the last cinematic gauntlet, though, if you grinded all of that and the arenas, you ended up with enough chips for 1, maybe 2 dupes, I think it was, but it wasn't any more than that. So we're just going to have to see what the reward structure looks like. But regardless, it is something different. They have this event going on during this 2-week downtime, and you can end up picking up, the majority of the Autobots are in here. Not all of them, but, if you want to get a new 5-star bot or get a dupe of somebody, you can. Or if you're a newer player, you can pick up the 4-star version for 4,000 chips. So anyway, that is going on this week. And so take a look at the boss fights, and then we'll come back afterwards and talk about it. guys, so that wraps up the boss fights for this Timeslide. And so I just wanted to give you a few tips and recommendations because this Timeslide isn't too difficult, but there are a couple of tricky lanes. And what I liked about this one is that they mixed it up a little bit in terms of mods. There are several mods in this one that are rarely used, and at least one that I believe is new, or at least has not been used in a very long time. So I like this Timeslide more than the last several that we've had, just because it's a bit different. So in the first chapter, we have the Mirage boss. The hard lane in that chapter, of course, is the Power Flow mod that Mirage is also on. So you ideally want to have at least one power controller with you. If you don't, then be very careful when that mod is active so that you're not accidentally pushing the opponent up to a special 3. The Mirage fight is not too bad, just be very careful of his power and you should do just fine. In the second chapter, we have Prowl, and this one has a couple of pretty cool mods. So the hard lane has the Hemophilia mod, which they've done a version of this a couple of times, but it's pretty rarely used. On this mod, the opponents are gaining about 2% power every second, but that can be nullified with bleeds. So I would highly recommend you bring a bleed bot, maybe even a couple of bleed bots, because you land a bleed, it nullifies the power gain for 10 seconds. When it comes back, you can nullify it again. If you don't have bleed bots, at least try to have a power controller like a Prowl, because that is very fast passive power gain, and if you're not careful, the opponents could be getting special 3s, in several of those fights. Prowl is also on the Absorb Projectile mod, which we've had a couple of times now, but it's relatively new, and it is a bit tricky because you have to kind of get used to it because you can't really use range shots, particularly those basic range shots that we're all so used to, because basic range shots, if they land on the opponent, will actually heal them. And so in that Prowl fight, you really want to be using melees as much as you can because he will heal significantly if you're landing those ranged shots. And then finally, Prowl is also on the Repair Time mod, the standard one. I use Cheetor for that fight just because he has Repair Block. It makes it a bit easier. But regardless, for the second chapter, I'd recommend at least one bleed bot and be really careful with those range shots when you're up against the Absorb Projectile mod. And then finally, in the final chapter, we have the Ultra Magnus boss. is always a bit annoying to fight. He's fast and he's pretty intelligent. And the 3 main lanes, the hardest lanes in that, first of all, we have Energon Storm, which we've had a million times before. So that's the one that every time you gain a bar of power, shock is inflicted on you. So you want to use those specials as quickly as you can. If you go up to a special 2 or 3, they will heal you somewhat, but you do have to be pretty careful because it is a lot of shock damage. Second, Ultra Magnus is also on Inflict Shock, and I believe this one is new, or at least it hasn't been used for quite a long time. This one's pretty interesting. So with this mod, if the opponent lands the first range shot on you, it will land shock on you that will take 100% of your health over 90 seconds. So you'll basically just slowly shock to death. It won't kill you right away, but it will apply this permanent shock to you. And then finally, he is also on Power Wipe, which is very similar to the Power Wipe mod that Kickback is on in ROTK. So in the Ultra Magnus fight, you are having all of your power wiped every 20 seconds. And by the way, there is an Energon Storm lane, an Inflict Shock lane, and a Power Wipe lane in the third chapter. So you want to have bots to deal with all of those. So in general, there's a lot of shock mods in this Timeslide and power gain mods. And so in the final chapter for and for the hardest lanes, I would definitely recommend at least one Purifier for a lot of these fights. Grim, TC. I would say a Beast Wars squad would be excellent for this Timeslide. Or at least have one bot that can purify shock, like a Sideswipe or a Kickback. For the Power Wipe mod, having a bot like Sideswipe or RC, any bot that can gain power quickly will help you out. And then, of course, for Energon Storm and for if necessary, you can always use Tronus because he can cheese it because he's gaining power all the time. The Energon Storm was not going to inflict shock on him. I don't usually like to use Tronus, but you can have him with you if you want it to just be easier, or you might want to bring him just in case you get into trouble because you might, especially if you don't have other purifiers, bring Tronus along and he can help you finish off Ultra Magnus if you end up losing other bots. I also just wanted to finally mention that G1 Ironhide is the mini boss on every lane in the final chapter, and he's always a bit annoying because of the melee reflect, and he's also on a power gain mod, the defensive one, where he's gaining some power every second that he's blocking. So you want to be super careful with that. Don't let him block too much, because otherwise he might get to a special 3 and take you out. So overall, not too tricky, but there are a few tricky fights, a few lanes that might cause a problem if you're not prepared. So I will leave it there for now. Do let me know if you have any questions, and we will speak again soon.